I want to jump in today by asking you a question. Are you a rule breaker or a rule follower? So quick show of hands. How many of you would say you're more of a rule follower? In general, you follow the rules? Yeah? Okay, how many of you are more of a rule breaker? Like you tend to break the rules? Oh boy. All right. How many of you would say it depends? Aha. Yeah, rules are rules. I want to submit to you today, Mark, that rules are tricky. Rules are tricky. So here's the deal. You can break the rules for the wrong reasons. All right? I did about 2 seconds of Googling and discovered hundreds of examples with the same plot line where someone broke the rules for the wrong reasons, namely to beat out the competition and win. And this happens in almost every sport. Let me give you a few examples. This first one comes from football. This was 2014, the AFC Championship game between the New England Patriots and the Indianapolis Colts. And you may recall that the New England Patriots destroyed the Colts. They won in a landslide, but later it was discovered that they had deflated a little bit of the air out of their footballs, right? So they could better grip the ball in the wet and rainy conditions. That was a scandal called Deflategate. 2014. By the way, the New England Patriots were also caught spying on the New York Jets in 2007. That was a different episode called Spygate. And we wonder why they win so many championships. Those are just the things we know, right? So that's football. In running, in 1980, a woman named Rosie Ruiz won the Boston Marathon for the females. Or so it was thought. In reality, she joined the race with just a few miles left. She didn't run the entire race. The same thing happened in horse racing in 1990. There was this horse named Landing Officer. It was a super foggy day, and the jockey decided to just hold up in a cloud of fog and then rejoin the race at the end. They figured that one out. All right? In 1976, there's a Soviet fencer named Boris Onischenko. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. But the way that they would calculate points is when you struck your opponent in the chest, the vest would create an electrical connection to keep score, right? Well, he figured out a way to bypass that by putting a little trigger in the handle of his sword so he could get points whenever he wanted. They figured that one out too. I've never played the game cricket before. I don't know anything about it. But apparently there's this thing called the sandpaper scandal. The sandpaper scandal, where a guy named Steve Smith and David Warner, frustrated with their lack of success against South Africa, decided to take sandpaper to the cricket ball so that it'd be harder to hit when they were pitching it. They figured that one out as well. Of course, there's been countless doping scandals in almost every sport over the last several years, whether it's Lance Armstrong with cycling, Marion Jones with track and field, right, and all the baseball players with giant heads, right? Sometimes I discovered it's not even the athlete that cheats, it's someone close to the athlete. Like in 1994, you had Tanya Harding's husband who orchestrated the attack against Nancy Kerrigan. I did not know figure skating was so competitive, but apparently it is. You can break the rules for the wrong reasons, namely to beat out the competition and win. But here's the deal. You can also follow the rules for the wrong reasons. You can also follow the rules for the wrong reasons. We have a harder time imagining examples like this because generally we associate following the rules with doing the right thing or being good. But let me give you a couple examples where this might be problematic. Imagine, for instance, your wife is in labor and you're driving to the hospital and all of a sudden you realize, wow, this baby it's coming. Like this child is going to be born in the front seat of the car unless I get to the hospital. But rather than putting the pedal to the metal and getting to the hospital, you stay at a steady 25 so as not to break the speed limit. That would be a problem, yes? Oh, yeah. Okay, let me give you another example. Imagine it's summertime and you're at the pool, right? Nice hot summer day, you're showing off your dad bod, right? You got it going on. When all of a sudden you notice someone's drowning in the deep end of the pool. And rather than running and jumping into the pool to save a life, you walk briskly because of the sign that says no running. That'd be a problem, yes? Now, we can laugh at these examples because they're kind of like hypothetical or whatever, but there's a lot of examples throughout history where people followed the rules for the wrong reasons with absolutely disastrous outcomes. So think for just a moment about all the rules that both blacks and whites followed that reinforced racism and segregation throughout the history of our nation. Right? You get to go to these schools, but not those schools. Drink from this drinking fountain, not that drinking fountain. This bathroom, not that bathroom. This spot on the bus, not that spot. And tons of people followed those rules. So here's the deal. You can break the rules for the wrong reasons, namely to win. You can also follow the rules for the wrong reasons, namely to, self-preservation and protection. But you can also break the rules for the right reason. You can break the rules for the right reason, and that reason is love. That reason is love. So Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, and she did it for the right reason. She did it out of love for self-dignity and respect for her race and ultimately those who were taking advantage of her, and she became a hero. Rules are complicated, and most of us relate to rules in self-serving ways. We break the rules when it would be convenient for us or we can gain an advantage, but then we follow the rules when we're fearful or out of self-preservation and protection. But God calls us into something totally different. He calls us into love. And so here's our big idea for today. Here's our bottom line. If there's one thing that you walk away with, let it be this. God invites us into the freedom of orienting our lives around love rather than laws. God wants us to orient our lives around love rather than laws. So often our rules get in the way of the one rule that really matters, which is living in love. And when you study the life of Jesus, you'll discover that Jesus consistently bent rules in order to faithfully live into this one rule that really matters, which is the rule of love. He never used rules against people. And we're going to see that in our passage for today. So last week, we wrapped up Luke chapter 13. And today, we're going to step into Luke chapter 14, verses 1 through 6, and I'm going to sprinkle in some commentary as we go to kind of bring this passage to life a little bit. So here's what it says. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee. So notice here, the setting is the Sabbath, which was a Saturday, and for the Jewish people, this was a day of rest, so no working was allowed. It's a Sabbath day. And typically, they would go to a service in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and then afterwards they would share sort of a special Sabbath meal. So Jesus has likely gone to a synagogue service, and now he's been invited into the home of a prominent Pharisee. Many suspect that this was actually the synagogue leader or ruler's house himself. So he's invited into the house of a prominent Pharisee as the guest of honor on the Sabbath day. I want us to notice that throughout the Gospels, we often notice that Jesus sort of relationally moved towards those who are on the margins, right? Sinners and tax collectors, people like that. But I also want us to notice that Jesus moved towards the Pharisees and the religious leaders as well. He didn't stiff-arm them. He created space to be with them. He loved indiscriminately. So he constantly was moving towards the Pharisees and the religious leaders as well, even when they had nefarious intentions. Even when they had ill motives, Jesus still moved toward the religious crowd. And that's certainly the case here, because watch what it says. It says, Jesus was being carefully watched. He's being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from an abnormal swelling of his body. This is a disease called dropsy, all right? And we're going to get into this in a little bit, but notice that they've basically set a trap for Jesus. It's the Sabbath day, and they believe you shouldn't be healing on the Sabbath, so they intentionally plant a man with a sickness right in front of Jesus to see what he'll do. Will he heal him on the Sabbath? And they're watching this carefully to catch him breaking the rules. Now, Jesus is smart, so he sees this. He asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. So Jesus sees this trap, and he responds to this trap by asking a question. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Listen, Jesus was a master at asking questions that exposed what was in people's hearts. He did this all the time. Jesus asked 307 questions in the Gospels. 307 questions. He's asked a question 183 times in the Gospels, and he only responds directly 3 times. You guys, Jesus would have been a very frustrating person to argue with, because you'd make a point and he'd respond by asking you a question that would expose what's going on in your heart. He constantly was doing this. So he sees this trap and he decides to ask a question that sort of exposes what's going on. He actually asks a question that functions as a counter trap. Is it lawful or not to heal on the Sabbath? And they're stuck because if they say yes, it's lawful, well, then they're giving Jesus permission to perform a healing, which they disagree with. But on the other hand, if they say no, then they reveal their own hardness of heart toward this man, and they don't want to do that either. So they remain silent. And in the ancient Near Eastern world, when you were in an argument with someone and the other party remained silent, you are essentially admitting defeat, that you are wrong or at best ignorant. So these Pharisees are being perceived in this moment as wrong. They're being stumped. So, given the fact that they don't answer, Jesus uses that as permission to do what he wants to do. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on his way. Then he asks them, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on a Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out? And once again, it says they had nothing to say. So Jesus follows up his first question with another question, and this question is designed to point out their hypocrisy. If this were your own child, your own son or daughter, or let's even leave humans out of it, if this were an animal you cared about, you would do exactly the same thing. Yeah? And once again, they're speechless. They don't know what to say. At the center of this passage is a debate about rules. A debate about rules. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Now, there's 2 things you need to know. And the first is this. According to rabbinic regulations, that is the way the rabbis interpreted the Mosaic law, it was against the law to heal on the Sabbath. All right? So according to their reading of the Mosaic law, it was a break of the law to heal on the Sabbath. And the only exception would be if it were a life and death scenario. You know, if someone is actually going to die, well, I guess you could perform a healing, was basically their position. But this guy, the disease dropsy, he's not going to die that day. So their view is, Jesus, do all the healing you want, but you got to wait till tomorrow. All right? That's the first thing you need to know. The second thing you need to know is there's actually nothing in the Mosaic law that prohibits performing a healing on the Sabbath day. So when Jesus performs this healing, he doesn't break anything explicitly taught in the Mosaic law. What he breaks is their interpretation of the Mosaic law. See the difference? There's nothing in the Mosaic law that explicitly prohibits healing on the Sabbath, so he doesn't break the Mosaic law. He breaks their interpretation of the law. And this actually reveals an important point for us today, and it's this. We must be very careful not to equate our interpretations of the Bible with the Bible. I'm going to say that again. We must be very careful not to equate our interpretations of the Bible with the Bible itself. Those two are not the same. There's a big difference. To get at this, I want to show you a diagram. And the central point of this is just to show you that not all beliefs are created equal. So we've got this diagram, and I'm colorblind, but let's get on the same page here. I'm told that this center circle is gray. Yeah? All right? And then we've got like a navy blue, kind of. Right? And then a green. All right. On the same page. Now, the centermost circle represents what's most important, and then less important, and then more less important, all right? So if we zoom in on the center circle, this first circle represents dogmas. All right, and dogmas are like the core central beliefs that define Christianity. These are beliefs that are salvific in nature, like your salvation hangs on whether or not you believe these things, and they largely center on the person of Jesus. So things like Jesus was fully God and fully man, Jesus died on the cross for our sins, Jesus rose from the dead, right? These are all core tenets of the Christian faith. All Christians everywhere basically believe in these things in order to be considered Orthodox Christians. Yes, we got it? And because these are central, there's a certain amount of conviction and intensity we bring to these beliefs. Like we're going to hold these with integrity and passion and conviction. Those are dogmas. Now, if we zoom out a little bit, the next layer is what we call doctrines. And doctrines are a little bit different than dogmas because they're not quite as important. Okay, they're still important, but they're not like salvific in nature. So what you believe here won't determine whether you're saved or not. They're just not as central. And not only that, but whereas dogmas typically center on Jesus, these beliefs focus on all kinds of different things that relate to church life and practice. And the most important thing about this category you need to know is that Bible-believing, Jesus-following Christians often reach different conclusions when it comes to doctrines based on their interpretation of the scriptures themselves. So let me give you an example of this. I went to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School for my grad school program. So every faculty member was a Bible-believing, Jesus-following evangelical Christian. I had one professor who taught infant baptism, and then another professor who taught adult baptism. Both professors anchored their conviction, their belief in the scriptures. They presented scriptures they thought reinforced their position. And there are tons of doctrinal issues just like that. Eschatology, your view of the end times. Charismatic gifts, are they for today or not? Women in ministry, what can they do, what can't they do, right? Communion, how do we practice that, how do we understand it? Tons and tons and tons of different doctrinal debates. And people land in different places based on their interpretation of the scriptures themselves. Is this making sense? So you've got dogmas, these are like the most important. Then you've got doctrines, they're important but not like of primary importance. And then lastly, you have opinions. And opinions are just that. They're your theological opinions on whatever the topic might be. So, do dogs go to heaven after they die? Great, have your opinion on that. But you're not going to start a denomination around that conviction. Hey, we're the doggy denomination, you're either in or out, right? Okay, so the point of this diagram is to show us that not all beliefs are created equal. Some beliefs, like dogmas, matter way more than other beliefs, opinions, and doctrines. And we bring a certain amount of conviction and intensity and passion to dogmas, but we ought to have less intensity and conviction when it comes to other things. We hold them out with a little more humility, yeah? But see, there's a major problem that's created when you start to treat opinions and doctrines with the same degree of intensity and conviction as that of your dogmas. When you start majoring on the minors, this creates a bunch of issues. Because if that's you, what ends up happening is anybody who disagrees with you isn't just disagreeing with you, they're disagreeing with God. How convenient is that? And before you know it, you'll start thrusting and throwing accusations at people who disagree with you that you don't really believe in the Bible and you don't really follow Jesus. And how convenient is that to equate your interpretations with the Bible itself so that whenever someone disagrees with you, they're not just disagreeing with you, they're disagreeing with God. How convenient is that? And yet it happens all the time. People start majoring on the minors, and then they sort of issue accusations against anybody who disagrees with them, no matter what the subject or topic is. Friends, I want to submit to you, please hear me on this. I want to submit to you that this is a huge growth area for us as a church community, and ultimately a huge growth area for churches in southeast Wisconsin. I've been serving here for almost 11 years. And it's highly disturbing to consider all the people who have walked away from this church because they've majored on a minor. They've kind of gotten this focus on this minor issue, and they elevate it to the place of a dogma. And when they find out that the church leadership, myself or someone else, or maybe their Bible study leader or whatever, disagrees with them, they get all upset, accuse other people of not following Jesus or being faithful to the scriptures, and they leave. And I want to just tell you guys, that isn't a sign of maturity. That's a sign of immaturity. It's a sign of immaturity. Think of it this way. My wife Josie and I, we don't agree on everything. Quite frankly, I don't agree with myself on everything, right? But Josie and I don't agree on everything. But imagine for a second if every time we got in a disagreement, one of us ended up in a hotel threatening to leave the other person. Would we say that that is a sign of a mature marriage? No. I thought that was an obvious question, right? No, that is not. That wouldn't be a sign of a mature marriage. That'd be a sign of an immature marriage. We would say you need help. Listen, you guys, a church isn't, you're not just supposed to jump from church to church whenever you get offended. Right? We're to be a people who are committed to Jesus and to one another. And I got to tell you, I'm just going to confess this. Part of my job is to stretch you intellectually. That's one of my jobs. When you learn something new, when you're asked to do something new, there's something called learning anxiety, where all of a sudden you're going to get really anxious because you're being stretched beyond what you know or what you've done before or what you've thought before. But that's part of my role on the weekends here, is to stretch you. And so if you're here just because you want what you already believe to be affirmed from the stage every weekend, you're going to get frustrated. And if every time you hear something you disagree with, you walk away because you think, man, this minor is actually a major, man, that's not a sign of maturity. It's a sign of immaturity. We're to be a group of people who are committed to Jesus and to one another, where we major on the majors and we minor on the minors. And that disagreement on minor issues is actually healthy and helpful. Sitting with people who have differences than you, they think differently or believe differently, is really helpful for me to not just have groupthink, but be challenged by the people around me. It opens up more space for all of us to grow. Here's a funny picture that gets at this. This is a membership class. That's the context. And you have a teacher that says churches and Christian movements throughout history. And you see all these little branches, right? And then he's got where they are circled. And he says, so this is where our movement came along and got the Bible right. And then someone in the class says, Jesus is so lucky to have us. Can we all agree we kind of want to avoid that? Yeah? Like there's respect and love we can have for other denominations and other people, knowing that they agree on the most important stuff. And this is nothing new. This goes all the way back to Augustine. He said in essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. That's freedom. In all things, charity. Let's major on the majors. Let's create space to disagree on the minors for charitable dialogue so we can all grow with one another. Let's have our commitment to Jesus and to each other be greater than our disagreements on minor issues. Yeah? Let's not have as many people walking away for silly reasons. All right. So we've got this situation where you've got the Pharisees who have basically made this mistake I've been spending time on. The Pharisees make two mistakes. The first is the one I've named. They equate their interpretation of the Mosaic Law with the Mosaic Law itself. They infuse their beliefs and practices with divine authority, and that's a mistake. But secondly, notice in order to trap Jesus, they actually compromise their own rules. This is highly ironic. They want to set a trap for Jesus, and in order to do that, they have to compromise their own rules. So, for instance, this man would have been considered unclean. So they had to compromise their own ritual purity laws in order to bring him into the home and sit them at this table. They're breaking their own ceremonial cleanliness rituals. Not only that, but this is an honor-shame culture. There's a social hierarchy here. And they're breaking all the rules. There's no way this prominent Pharisee is ever going to be hanging out or associated with this man who has this disease. They would have never crossed paths. They're on different ends of the social spectrum. Not only that, but this man and this particular illness was associated with immorality. So everyone's perception is, oh, you don't get this disease unless you've done something majorly wrong. And so this guy's likely a sinner and is experiencing God's wrath or judgment right now. This making sense? So the Pharisees sort of represent, we've got to see this, they represent our human tendency to relate to rules in self-serving ways. On one hand, they want to enforce the Sabbath rule. Hey, Jesus, this one's really important. Can't break that one. But on the other hand, they break all these other rules to set the trap. And Jesus transcends all of this in what he does. Notice this. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and he sent him on his way. And he asked them, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out? And they again had nothing to say. So what Jesus is doing here is he's pointing out their hypocrisy. He's going, hey, guys, if this were your own child on the Sabbath day caught in a well, your own son or daughter, you'd have no problem with me doing something to intervene. In fact, let's take human beings out of this for a moment. Let's just say it was an animal. Well, you'd have no problem, once again, with me intervening. Why? Because you care about that thing. You care about that child. You care about that animal. Because you care, you wouldn't have a problem with me intervening. But see, you have a problem with me intervening for this man. Why? Because he doesn't matter to you. He doesn't matter to you. You don't care about him. So Jesus is drawing attention to their heartlessness, their hardness of heart. But he's not just calling them out. He's actually calling them into something different. He's calling them and inviting them into love. He's inviting them to make the orienting law of their lives the law of love. And he does this by modeling what love looks like. Jesus models the law of love right here in this passage with a boundaryless embrace. He models what love looks like with a boundaryless embrace. Please see this. You guys, Jesus doesn't just break the Sabbath rule. He breaks every rule he could have broken in this moment to show what love looks like. So remember, you've got the ritual purity law. This guy is considered unclean. Everybody's probably leaning away from him because they don't want to be in contact with him, at risk of being unclean, considered unclean themselves. And notice what the passage says. It says that Jesus took hold of him and healed him. Imagine that. Jesus gets up from his spot. Nobody else wants to be around this man. Nobody else wants to touch this man. They view him as a sinner who's committed some act of immorality. Jesus gets up from his spot and he embraces this man. He hugs this man in front of everybody. Jaws are on the floor right now. Not only that, but he's breaking all the social hierarchy rules, all the rules. Jesus is the guest of honor. He's got the highest seat at the table. This man is the lowest. Jesus ignores all of that and embraces him. He embraces him with a hug. He heals him with a hug. And then lastly, he breaks the Sabbath rule. This is shocking. This is bold. Everybody would have been offended. But Jesus is modeling what love looks like. He's modeling what love looks like with a boundaryless embrace. When you read the Gospels, it's so important to put yourself in the characters of the story. So there's two things I want to drive home. Two things. One is this. We've got to put ourselves in the place of this man, the sick man in the story. There's so many people I encounter who their lives are a mess. They've made mistakes. Some big mistakes, some just a bunch of small mistakes, and they think they're outside of God's love. They feel broken and fractured and full of shame. And man, I just encourage you, if that's you, spend some time this week. Just spend some time, just name and hold out all these things you're ashamed of about your life. All these wrong things you've done, all the mistakes you've made, hold those out. And just imagine Jesus getting up from his spot and embracing you and making you whole with his love. We've got to put ourselves in the place of this man because Jesus reveals what God's heart looks like in the face of brokenness. Here's the other thing we need to do. We need to put ourselves in the place of these Pharisees because we have a lot in common with them. Their rules get in the way of their love. Their rules get in the way of their love. How many of you have ever heard of the book, The 5 Love Languages? Anybody? Yeah, it's a great book. The only problem with it is he misses the most important love language. There's actually 6, and that love language is sarcasm. It's my top love language. Sarcasm. It's a great book. Basically, he argues that, there's different ways that people naturally give and receive love, right? And it's really helpful to know what yours is and the people around you so you can give love in the way people are most likely to receive it and then expand the way you receive love as well. It's a good book. But I got to tell you, this book created a lot of tension in my marriage the first couple years. And the reason why is because Josie's top love language is physical touch. So she comes from a family of physical touch. Like you walk into Josie's house and you get about 30 hugs in the first 30 seconds, like one per second, you know? It's overwhelming. And so this is Josie. She needs like 10 hugs every day. And whenever you're in the same room, like you got to be touching in some way. So like an elbow or like a knee, maybe a toe, right? Got to be touching in some way. And see, what you got to know about me is that is not my primary love language. In fact, I wish that love language didn't exist. I come from a family where there were actually boundaries in place and you respected other people's space, right? So early on, this created a lot of trouble because we'd be watching TV and I'd be like, why does my back hurt right now? Oh, because Josie's leaning on me, right? So I'd create rules like, here's a line on the couch. You get that side, I get this side. Here's your popcorn, here's my popcorn. Let's enjoy the movie, right? Yes, we're in bed, but there should be a line in the bed. Quit creeping over and making me too hot, right? So I was constantly creating these rules. And I'll admit, like, please know this, I've grown a lot in this area because I woke up to the fact that, like, my rules were blocking the expression of love in our marriage, right? My rules were getting in the way. And this is what happens to us. Our rules get in the way of the one rule that really matters, which is love. So here's your homework for this week. What rules are blocking you from the rule of love? What barriers are blocking your love in some way? Perhaps this is like a person that you haven't forgiven yet. Perhaps there's someone you're having a disagreement with and you've been more fixated on being right than being in a right relationship. Maybe there's an entire group of people you have a stereotype about. You know, a different race or ethnicity, different sexual orientation, whatever that might be. What's blocking you from the one thing that really matters, which is living in love? I want to invite our worship team up here. We're going to sing a song about what it means to live in love because this is our central mandate as followers of Jesus. One of the ways the world is supposed to know that we follow Jesus is by our love. And so we're actually tasked with a mission to love like Jesus, not just here in the church, but with every single person we encounter. So let's respond by singing together.